Sponsor Aavik Network Management discovers your complete network inventory, displays real-time performance metrics, backs up configs, generates compliance reports, and more in an intuitive, simple-to-use tool that scales as big as you might need. Get your free 14-day trial at aavik.com/heavy networking. That's AUVIK.com/heavy networking. Welcome to Heavy Networking. If you sort your Skittles by color and the colors by visible light wavelength, and then rank severity of a network outage by the name of the Skittle flavor, you found your tribe. I'm Ethan Banks with Drew Conway Murray, and if you'd like to connect with us, because we are real people after all, you can do that on the Packet Pushers Community Slack group or LinkedIn. Visit packetpushers.net to join the Slack, or IRC, because IRC lives on, much like IPv4. And hey, we're talking about adding artificial intelligence to your network automation toolbox with Eric Chou. Eric is the author of the AI Networking Cookbook, available now. And Eric is also the host of the Network Automation Nerds podcast, which you can find right here on the Packet Pushers Podcast Network. Eric, welcome back to Heavy Networking, man. It is good to have you here. And dude, I don't know how you do it, but you wrote another book. Would you give us the 10,000-foot overview of what this book covers?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to be back. It's highlighted my day to speak to my esteemed colleagues. So thank you for making my, Tuesday, much more beautiful than the rest of the week. And I guess I didn't learn the first 6 times, right? And I wrote another book. I took on the task. I think basically what I wanted to do was, if I'm learning AI anyways, I want to document it. I want to do it in a systematic way, and I want to bring people along with me if they're willing to, spare a few dollars to buy the book, to listen to my podcast or whatnot. So that was the basic premise. And little did I know, right? Like 12 months later, or like however long between the planning to the actual execution was. Now there's a book. The book was released in January. And basically, it follows the same pattern as my previous book, Mastering Python Networking. I want to set up the foundational piece. So essentially, for example, setting up ChatGPT. What is the LLM? What are some of the parameters I could set? How do you set up local models? How do you use it locally? How do you use it in a closed gap system? And then move on to some of the aspects like setting up the front end. What about if I wanted to run, some sort of decoupling the backend, if I want to just use API, then we use more into the more advanced topics like MCP or building a copilot. How do I evaluate AI models, basically, right? So we all know, a model could cost different costs on tokens. So if I could use a 3.5, turbo, why do I want to use 4? Why do I want to use 5 and stuff like that? So going and laying down the foundation, moving up one layer, and then going out into the more advanced topic once we lay those foundations down.
So it sounds like you said laying the foundations, meaning it sounds like that's the kind of stuff that are more principles and not tied to specific models or changes in the technology.
Yeah, hopefully. So I think one thing that people would find out is there's no like OSI layer within AI, right? Like there's nothing that everybody just, couple themselves into the physical layer, and then everything that's, more or less the coming with the physical aspect of networking. So with AI and different vendors, the open AIs have different, parameter terms or terminologies, charging model, everything else, the system messages, then Anthropic versus like say Cursor, and they have different interfaces. But yeah, you're right. So the aim is really just to set something up to get that first win, to know that hello world. Then and then we go into more or less the other aspect. So for example, we obviously you need to set up an account. So we need to pick something to set up an account. So we set up OpenAI. And then just to get that first win, we don't go off into say, how do you set up Anthropic and set up 5 other, like providers. We go directly into how do you change the temperature, meaning how do you change the creativeness of your answer? How do you include your system message so you don't have to type it into the prompt over and over again? So yeah, so laying down the foundation, get that first win. And then chapter 2 will go directly into, now that you have that first win within the GUI, how do you use a script to automatically query that? And then we change direction and say, well, now that we have those down, that you could, go explore further. However, I know there's a certain amount of people who doesn't feel comfortable in talking to cloud-based LLMs. So how do we set it up locally? And then we pick one thing, right? There are many, maybe not many, but multiple ways that you could run LLM locally. And I just pick one, Ollama, and then just go from there and repeat, rinse and repeat, but doing it locally. So I think I hope that gave kind of a good overview of what I meant by foundation.
Yeah, for sure. And let's just set it up right away. Where can folks get this book if they're interested?
You could get it at most retailers, Barnes and Nobles, if you still have physical bookstore. I don't know if they have physical bookstore, a seller in the physical bookstore, because the last few times I've been to the bookstores, they're like very fiction focused. So that's right up your cup of tea, Drew. But for me, mostly when I look at the sales breakouts, most of them come from Amazon. So I think, most of the time people get it from Amazon. You can also get it directly from Pact. One thing that I do want to mention is we know your reading habits have changed. So even if you get it from Amazon, there's a QR code in the book where you get a digital format from Pact directly. So that's EPUB. If you use the EPUB formatting, if you use Kindle, if you if you'd rather read it in PDF, you could all do that. So yeah, thanks for that plug-in. You could get it at all the retailers.
Kindle. Eric, I bought your book on Kindle via Amazon, downloaded it, and I was reading it on my Mac on my big screen with the Kindle reader. Nicely laid out, easy to follow everything, both the code sections, of which you have a lot of different code and or text screen output that's there, as well as your explanatory paragraphs that give you context on what's going on. And it's wonderful. It's very easy to read digitally. I know some people really like paper because reasons, and that's fine too, of course. But if you're wondering, well, how'd this render in Kindle? Pretty good by my eyes. I thought it was an easy read.
Yeah, I think for technical books, I think a little bit different than the experience that you read, like a fiction or a biography or something like that. It's because there's a lot of code involved. So just like all the other books, the code are in the GitHub repository. It's not guarded by like a paywall or anything like that. So even if you haven't bought the book, you could go, look at the code yourself. And what I also try to do, I don't know if other people have noticed, but I try to do a lot of explanation within the code comments, so that even if you just grab the code directly from GitHub or whatnot, you could actually realize the flow. You don't need a companion book to know, this is the section where we hit the response or something like that. However, if you want
buy the book, seriously,
if you want more explanation, or if you want to have like a curated flow of thoughts, right, going from basic to more advanced, then yes, go read the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, you have a community that people can join if they want to keep up with you and keep up with each other as they work through the book, right?
Yes, absolutely. So AI is moving so fast. I just recently decommissioned my network automation community site and migrating everything to this new networkautomationnerds.com that you could sign up for free, or if you choose to, there's like early access for premium contents. So either way is fine. But essentially, when you sign up, you'll get notification on whenever I publish something new. And also you get invite to the Discord community where there's a real-time chat on people who are, I guess, more active on any one time for questions and answers. That's why I'll hang out most of the time too. So yeah, please do feel free to join. Like I said, AI is moving so fast. And even in just that 5 minutes that we talked about, or 8 minutes that we talked about this topic, right? We already mentioned there's multiple ways of running AI locally. I only mentioned one, Llama. There's LM Studio, which I think it's a little bit more beginner friendly, but less code, like less developer mindset. So, that's where I will try to supplement whatever that I have in the book to say, yeah, Llama is great, but if you want something that's downloadable in a package that's API ready, then go for LM Studio, for example. And that's actually where I will start posting and try to make up for, kind of the latency, which is inherently built into book publishing.
Yeah. So that's networkautomationnerds.com, nerds plural.
Correct. So network automation, so 2 N's in between, networkautomationnerds.com, and we'll have that in the show notes. But yeah,
we will.
So what level of network engineer would you say this book is aimed at?
I think probably someone who's passed like either Nowhere Plus or CCNA and have a little bit of background in Python because all the code are in Python. So, if you want to just follow a GUI, that's great, and that's workable. But if you want to get the most out of it, obviously, you want to be able to interpret the code or have AI explain the code to you. If you're willing to learn a little bit of Python, at least, you don't get intimidated when you see, spacing and code blocks or indentation, that sort of stuff. So I would say to get the most out of the book, you want to have basic networking knowledge and basic Python knowledge.
Yeah, and it is truly basic Python. It's not like this is super complex, excessively structured, or millions of lines of code at all. I mean, they are straightforward examples, Eric.
I wouldn't be able to write them if that's super complex. You're right at my level, man. Like, you just have to cope with like that. That's the ceiling right there. So that ceiling is pretty low, as you mentioned.
Because it's lots of us that are trying to learn something that we're doing it on a budget. What costs do I need to plan for to be able to apply AI for network engineering?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When I first started writing the book, there was actually a free tier for a lot of the provider. OpenAI, I believe, actually offered a free tier. And a lot of providers actually give you free tokens, like Cursor, for example, give you some free tokens to play with until you decide to buy the freemium model. But less and less, I think by the time the book published, even when we're doing the final editing, they stopped offering free trials. So you do need to, actually prepare a few bucks to get to sign up, have a credit card verification. Same as Amazon AWS, right? So AWS actually asks for credit card information up front, but they may or may not charge you. So I think that's kind of the mindset that you need to have. But just case in point, I think I put in $20 in the beginning of the book writing for OpenAI, and I don't think I used up all of it, by the time I end with it.
Okay, so you didn't sign up like $20 a month. You just bought X number of tokens or something?
Yeah, so again, I think that's a different charge model for different providers. For OpenAI, at least on the API layer, that's one thing that's explained in chapter 1 is that the OpenAI playground or platform that they're calling it now is different than the ChatGPT that you launch your interface with. Mm-hmm. So when you subscribe to ChatGPT, for example, you actually have to pay monthly subscription. I think whatever $19.99 or whatever that price was for you to keep your history, keep your chat prompt active, and so on. But for a platform where you use mostly API access and help you fine tune, as I will explain in the book, all of that are usage based. So you actually put up, say $20, and then you kind of exhaust that token. And because we don't use don't use tokens that much, usually you exhaust token when you need to put in a lot of context, like thousands or even hundreds of thousands of words into one window. Then use a lot of token to exhaust that. And therefore, if we're just using basic scripts, the case in point is that, you won't exhaust your tokens, even if you do the whole book examples. However, I don't use just OpenAI. I want to provide more variety. So Anthropic, actually have a subscription model where Claude Code is actually, needs a monthly subscription. Cursor, if you do it, monthly subscription. But again, they're actually not that expensive. So I believe all of them are less than $20. So, pick and choose what you want to do. Spend a few bucks. It's worth it. Yeah. And at least, me, I use everything. I use, paid account for everything. Gemini, OpenAI, Cursor, and Anthropic, and everything else that, video editing or, all the other services. Canva, I have that pro account too. So I've tried it all. And to me, it's worth it.
Now, you did mention running a model locally. Is that, in theory, I could download a model and run it for free if I'm running it locally. Is that worth it?
Yeah, I think it's worth it to try it. And I think it's worth it to set it up just to know if it's for you. The models that you download, So let's go back and say, what does a model in the cloud offer you, right? So the model in the cloud offer you as a single interface where you can pick and choose the latest, the greatest model or not. So for example, if you're running in the cloud, you get to just using a drop-down menu, choose between GPT-5, GPT-4o, 4, Turbo 3.5, whatever. And same thing with Anthropic, Haiku or any of the other models that you could choose. But in the locally, you don't get those models, right? Those are proprietary models that the cloud providers offer. And what you would do is you would set up these containers, right? Like these carriers of models. And you would, in the book, I will use Olama as an example. You have two Docker containers. One houses the model, and the other one is the interface that interface with you on your chat interface or whatnot. And those models you will grab from like a quote unquote open marketplace, right? And then so you could download in the same format, and you really don't your judgment on which model to choose really depends on user feedback. It's almost like going on Amazon and look at, there's 1,000 reviews, and that's 4.8, and I suppose that's better than others. Or they will explain to you that this is, I forgot the term they use, but essentially it's like untethered, right? So I did compare and contrast, in one of the book examples on, if you want to write code, let's go download like a regular model versus like a model that's specific tailored toward coding. And and then, let's go download another model which is not censored and then look at these answered. And so a lot of times, you don't even think about the things that you get from a curated model like a ChatGPT, right? Like or Anthropic, let's use Claude, for example, that, when you ask something more sensitive, like, let me go on like a little tangent here. Say, if I'm depressed and I want to ask about how do I like end my life, whatever, right? Like really scary. These curated models are trained so that they don't tell you. They tell you to go get help. Here's the way to kind of alleviate your symptoms. And in the uncensored model that you download from this marketplace, may or may not have done that. So I think that's kind of the guardrails that you have to keep in mind. Is that yes, you could run it locally. It's worth it to try it just so that you know the process. But whether you want to use it, permanently, or you want to use it in a production environment, the scope that you want to use it, that's something that to be put more thoughts into.
But it's not just the model you pick and run locally. It's from my experience it's a performance thing. So I downloaded, several different models, and at the end of the day, even with a Mac M4 Pro that's got a good bit of GPU behind it, it takes a while to churn through my query and come back with a response.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the same bottleneck as I did. That I think the most the biggest model I could run is that at a reasonable speed is like 7 billion parameters. And there are already 13 billion parameters, and gazillions out in the cloud models. So definitely that you have to tailor your expectation on just matching your hardware. And you could get a little bit more improvement on, maybe like you said, like a Mac Mini M4 that has a ton of GPUs. But then you have to have that software matching that. There's like a little graphic interface, which I did not go into the book. Again, like things are just moving so fast. But there's a little graphic interface that you could see that when you run, say, LLM Studio, how many tasks are being offloaded to your GPU versus your CPU. So if your task stays on CPU for too long, definitely you're going to see that slowness. But if you see your GPU utilization hitting up, that chances are you're getting more performance. So I think that's a combination of both your hardware limitation as your software limitation. And again, if you run it locally, you're on your own. You're on your own tech support. Your own, there's nobody. The buck stops here, right in front of the screen. Versus like, hey, I could point fingers and happily switch to another model when it's like Anthropic or whatnot. That goes into your $20, right? Like, I don't want to learn to be my own tech support. I want to enjoy the IT services. So that's what that $20 would get you. It's these are nice to haves.
And these days, if you're going to kit out new hardware, that's going to be a lot more than $20. So
yeah, they actually have. I heard they actually have like a shortage of Mac Minis because that's like the cheapest that you could get to run OpenCloud. And several naming changes after, right? Like it's called OpenCloud now, but it's like so popular that it's actually causing a little bit of a shortage on the Mac Mini. So yeah, definitely, even for the cheapest one that you could buy reasonably, it's like a couple $100.
So before you wrote this book and after writing this book, has your opinion changed on the utility or usefulness of AI for network engineers, for network automation?
Yeah, forget before and after, man. If you asked me yesterday and today, depending on the day of the week and the time of the day, my opinion constantly changes. And absolutely on just the knowing. So I thought I would do something different this time before the book launch. It's like I have like T-5, T-4, T-2, and kind of build up the quote unquote excitement for the book launch. And on one of the days was mastery is optionality. So I think that's the main thing that I've learned from just learning in general, learning AI in particular, that once you learn something, you have the option to put it down or use it or not to use it. So I think that's the biggest opinion that I've changed, is that AI is great for some tasks, and I would, personally not use AI for some things because I want to retain my humanity. I want to still feel like a person. Like this thing I did, I still want to feel like I own it. That I wouldn't use AI for. But in order to get to that point, you have to learn it. You have to learn it enough to be able to say no, right? So I think that's the biggest opinions that have changed, is that I want to learn as much as I could, so I make that choice, make that option, and be mindful about that option versus I don't do it because I can't, right? So like I will learn how to run a local LLM model, and I choose not to because of X, Y, and Z and everything that Ethan said. But now just that optionality is what I'm after. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've changed before and after learning all these stuff and going zigzag and whichever way that I went to bang my head and come back.
So part of your learning wasn't just learning how to use AI, but also figuring out where AI could be useful and where it probably isn't going to be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just my personal choice. And there's something that I talk to my daughters a lot, because schools is just being turned upside down with AI. Let's just be honest, right? Like people actually use AI for all kinds of crazy stuff, including image generation. And school is one of those places where people or the students haven't had like that prefrontal fully grown, or like they haven't formed their opinions clearly yet. So I think that's kind of related to what we talked about here, is that I want to be able to be mindful about the choices I make, or as much as possible, as opposed to just things that algorithm pushing in front of me.
Well, Eric, I want to spend the rest of the show diving into one of your chapters, and I think it was chapter 3, was all about prompt engineering, which early on when I first heard their term, I was like, really? I got to learn how to say words to the robot? That doesn't seem like a skill.
But in fact, they'll spare you later on.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. Let's talk about prompt engineering. So explain why carefully crafting a prompt is an important thing, and do it in the context of how an LLM actually works.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that all of us have that initial resistance, right? Like if it's so great, if AI is the next big thing, why do I even have to provide context for it? It should just automatically know. But is it though? Is it? Because if you think about AI as a partner or as a colleague, for example, a very capable colleague that, let's just say you're in a network engineering team and you hire some, superstar network engineer, and he or she started. Would you just tell him or her to go, work on production device? No, not really, right? Like the person is very well versed in BGP, OSPF, networking technology, but you want to give the person context, right? Here's how we do things. We're under strict restrictions on maybe some of the security stuff. This is how we name our devices. Here's how our architecture is, and so on and so forth. So all of these, if I couple those into context, that is why you want to help AI to do, is to give it as much context as possible. So you're limited from just this, open-ended question into a more specific thing that you want it to do. So, yeah, and then we could go into more details on that, but I'll stop right there and see if that actually makes sense.
Well, we can give it more context, but an LLM does not think like a human thinks. That is, in that sense, in the context of reasoning or thinking, providing context isn't helping the LLM in that sense, but it is helping the LLM because of how it actually delivers a response to us vector database words that have a higher probability of following on to the prompt that we've given them. I have that roughly correct, right?
Yeah, so I think that's precisely because LLM cannot reason, it cannot understand like the subtleties of human language. That's why you want to give it as much information as possible, right? It's not going to read between your lines on, you hate JSON, so give me, I don't know, YAML file. So you have to specifically say, give me the JSON file, give me the YAML file. And if you remember previous generations of AI interactions on the first time that you saw chatbot, right? ChatGPT or any other chatbot that you have, that's all you have. And the context you could give it is you have to copy and paste everything in there. If you want to give it examples of your router config, you got to copy and paste into that router config and say, hey, look at this router config and tell me XYZ. Why do we have, this ACL? Like, what does this line, 56 ACL does or whatnot? You have to copy all of that in, and you quickly run out of this context window that you have to copy and paste everything in.
Right.
So the next step on, that evolution is we have system messages. So you don't have to repeat your context every single time. So that you could, in the system message, you say you're a senior network engineer specializing in network automation, have a preference toward Python and JSON, and you're very yada yada yada, right? So that system message actually stays with all the chats across. So again, you're providing more context. You just don't have to do it over and over again.
We're taking a quick break for sponsor Aavik Network Management. And if you've not heard of Aavik, they've been around for many years, and they have the goal of making it easier to run your network. Good visibility into what's going on, network maps, proactive alerting so that you're aware of a problem before the help desk starts lighting up, compliance reporting to make the auditor happy, config backup so you can go back to a non-cook state if you need to. You get the idea. Now, here's how Aavik works. You deploy an Aavik collector, which discovers your network and then figures out your network topology and maps it all out for you. You don't even have to know how the network is connected. Aavik's going to talk to your network devices and figure that out. All right. Now that Aavik knows your network topology, it's going to begin monitoring your network. And you don't have to tell Aavik everything you want it to monitor. There are 64 plus pre-configured alerts built in, dashboards for every device. And Aavik can talk all kinds of different protocols. SNMP can talk APIs. If you've got devices with APIs, it knows how to parse syslogs. It can do NetFlow and do flow collection and more. So you get this really useful repository of all of your network telemetry in one place. There you go. And Ethan, that sounds like red light, green light network management, more or less. Yeah, but there's a lot more than that. You're going to get inventory tracking. You're going to get config backup and restore, as well as application identification and geodata through traffic analysis. And Aavik scales too. If you have one campus or you're managing the networks of many different clients that you might have, Aavik can get it done. So check out aavik.com/heavy networking to see your live network map in minutes with their 14-day free trial. That is auvik.com/heavy networking, aavik.com/heavy networking if you're in the market for a new network management solution. And now back to the show.
When you were saying context, I was thinking specificity as opposed to saying what went wrong on the WAN. I would say, what happened on this router located in California between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. But it sounds like the other version of context is giving this LLM a persona, like you're a senior network engineer, and that's also, does that count as context?
Yeah, or like you could tell it to return in the response in Elmo's voice, right? So like, yeah, that's part of the context, in my opinion, that, because you could actually say, explain it to as someone who's a very intelligent person but not a network engineer, or like you could explain back into as a senior network engineer. So
could you give an example of what you mean then by a prompt with context and a prompt without context?
Sure. So I think the context is half of what you said about context as in the environment. So I want to say, hey, give me a configuration back in terms of iOS XE, or give me a configuration back in Junos. And then I want to attach a few files and say, here's the example of our naming convention, or this is an example of iOS config or whatnot. So those are the technical contexts. And then I would actually give it more persona-wise and say, hey, explain back to me as if I am a very intelligent business person, i.e. my manager, but not very crazy about, intricacy of, routing protocols and so that.
Okay.
So I think those are the ones that the personality contests are coming back in the environment, right? Like, so let's just say I'm writing a mob, so I need to break it down step by step versus I just want the configuration, copy and paste that I could, evaluate, human in the loop, and then copy back in. So I think a well-crafted prompt would be example and context. So, as much as you could cram in as you could, and as however you want to do. So I think a lot of times what the experience have improved on is how many of these contexts you have to do manually versus the context that's kind of implied. So none other than obvious than the break between a chat with system messages than with agentic. So I think, in a agentic world where, if you have some sort of coding assistant like Cursor, for example, or Cloud Code, for example, that they actually, if you launch it, then some of the contexts are implied. First of all, you want to write code. And second is if you have like Pythons, you crawl through your folder where you locate your code, you'll see that, oh, you use Python. Oh, you has virtual environment. You have all these other stuff that is set up. So then it has all those contexts implied for you. So that I think that drastically improve your experience where I don't have to tell it, hey, activate the virtual environment. Hey, I want to use Python and here's my standard on writing code. It's going to crawl through all that and say, oh, you always, you use, even though you use Python, but you use data safety, right? Like you will specify, I want to return a string, I want to return a number. It will look at your code and say, oh, that's what you want, and then implicitly that when it helps you write that code next time, it will write something that's data type safe or something like that. So I think,
well, could we also say, Eric, that there's a global and a local context from a certain point of view? That is, I was using Cloud for a while. I'm not anymore. I'm using Gemini pretty much always, but.
Sure.
But I remember in my Claude configuration, I could give it what I would consider a global context. It was right in the settings. These are things you should know about me. I'm a network engineer. I know this. I have this level of expertise. I'm comfortable with these technologies and not these other ones, and so on. So it always knew that about me when I would start a new chat. And then within the new chat, I could then have local context and describe a whole bunch of other things that I'm looking for from that interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably classify as a context, but in a subcategory of guardrails, right? Like, so you could definitely have guardrails on the global level. Let's just say, we use our company, we use poetry. So everybody should use poetry on, package management. So in the global level, I want to imply, and this depends on, your tool of choice. It could be just this hidden .cloud file or this hidden cursor file that specify, hey, you should always use poetry for package management unless specified otherwise. Then the next new hire comes in, you don't even have to repeat that. So when he uses the same tool, that's a guardrail that's operated under on the global level. And on the local level, when you launch this subject, like just to say our team prefers use, plain vanilla JavaScript versus some type of framework like Vue or React or anything like that. So that on the local level, when you and I, the three of us are collaborating on a project, we want to have that local guardrail. And again, it's a hidden .cursor file and the more specific ones that, will specify our requirement. Use plain vanilla JavaScript versus any type of framework when preferred unless I override it. So I think those are the guardrail context that we could specify that is both on the global level and on the local level.
So we're saying with prompt engineering then, step one, don't be vague, be specific, give lots of context, explain yourself. Imagine you're explaining this to someone who hasn't heard about any of this before. And yes, depending on the model and so on, it's a model that's for writing code. You can make a few assumptions about what it knows or what it's going to assume about what you're asking. But generally speaking, be specific. Write a longer prompt. Take some time to think through all the facts that are relevant to the thing that you're asking the AI to do. And then you're going to get a good answer. If you're vague, you're going to get not such a good answer.
Yeah, exactly. And if you feel exhausted just hearing those, then yes, me too. And the companies have heard you. So there's a whole kinds of guardrails or additional contact that they help you to be persistent. So for example, Claude. So there's like Claude IMD that everything that you talked about, you could either put in a hidden file, you could put it into Claude IMD, and when you launch Claude, it's gonna supposed to read that. And if you're using cross agents, cross provider, supposedly, right? Like this is where like things get a little bit iffy. There's no like RFC that mandates you to do it. But if you put it into agents.md, then all the Claude or Claude or Gemini or whoever like launch this should look at this agents.md and follow the instructions to guardrail. Does it always work? I don't know. You tell me. I haven't tried it, but essentially, you could actually do all of that and try. And once you work it out, right? So here's the thing: prompt engineering is about iterations. So you would start on something, and then you would work on something, and find the best match of verbosity versus the results that you would get. At some point, you're going to run out of things to say. It's like you could only be as verbose as possible as you could to a certain point, and then there's like diminishing returns, right? I would add a lot more examples, but the incremental gain I get was like 1% better answer that I would get. So at some point, you find that point, and then you want to grab everything that you've learned so far into a permanent file so that you could copy and paste next time, or go into a more permanent location. You check that into Git, and then everybody else in your team will have that context, and so they don't have to repeat themselves.
Yeah, it's really interesting you put it that way about iterations, because that's basically programming. That's coding.
Yeah.
You start with the first thing and you're like, oh, right, I didn't think about this or that. And then so you add that component to it, error checking maybe. And oh, yeah, but then the code doesn't handle this corner case. And you got to add, and it's this constant cycle of iteration until you're like, this is production ready. I'm ready to go. It's not obvious that prompts need to be that way, but I have had that experience where it's like, oh, I did not ask the question right, considering the answer I got. I need to tell it more stuff and then try again, with more information, or just stay in the chat. Just go, okay, you gave me this answer, but I was really looking for this and consider these things. And it'll go, oh, okay. And then it tries again and you get a more precise answer or more, something more helpful.
Yeah, isn't that life though, Ethan? It's just nobody knew what we're doing the first time we do it, and then we just kind of keep getting better at it. And what is that saying? Don't compare your first day with somebody else's like 100th day or something like that, right? So yeah, it's all about iteration and trial and error. One thing I would kind of supplement what you talked about is a lot of times when I meet the quote unquote AI critics, or like people who say, I would never use AI because it hallucinates. Usually
they're very loud, and there are very many of them. Yes.
Yes. And nothing wrong with that, right? Like you're entitled to your own opinion. But after conversing with them and trying to understand why they don't like it, what is the reason why it's not working the way you are, usually is the fact that they try it once, it messed up, and they just push it away, right? How dare it that you cannot add like 2 + 2 is 6? Come on now, right? Like hallucinated, whatever. Then I just did away with it. And two things I'll say to that. One is, did you pick the right model? Because nowadays there's like multiple options, and the default model usually is the cheapest and not that great. And so did you think like the thinking mode, the deep research mode, or whatever, the math mode? So first thing is the right model. And the second is, did you iterate enough? Like, did you actually ask it the right way? Did you like all of these things that we just talked about in the last 10 minutes? So most of the time, once you get those two hurdles out, picking the right model, iterate the right way, usually they convert into, it's actually okay. It's competent, right? It may not be the best, but it's competent, and I will use it in the right situation. So that's back to what you were talking about.
Have you found one model over another seems better suited for networking and network automation, or is it just more about your prompting capabilities and your willingness to play and experiment?
Yeah. So ask me next week. I might have a different answer. I mean, I'm totally serious, right? I use GPT-4o quite a bit in the example just because it's cheap. It's 4, so at the time was the latest. and they decommissioned it, and just a couple weeks ago, I think, because they were getting sued at various reasons. But so yes, so right now, if I want to launch coding and if I want to do specific things that I want to write code for, I will use Claude. And let me pull up my current interface, and I'll tell you I'll use Sonnet 4.6, right? And then and then I would turn on the thinking mode on. That's what I would do. But again, it's moving so fast, and be your own judge. Take it with a grain of salt. And I love the fact that Gemini sometimes it's just easy to launch Gemini within the browser because you're opening up and you don't want to explain things to them, and they have access to the tab that you open. So those two are what I use the most right now, and that includes network engineering.
Okay,
and including live questions, live choices questions. Should I not go back to school?
You mentioned along the way that I could specify as part of my context that I want an answer back in JSON or YAML, something like that. How does that work? How would the LLM even know, like, if it's a JSON response, what key value pairs to be using?
Yeah, that beats me, man. That must be the training that they've done and the billions of dollars they sink into the data center. But yeah, that definitely makes a difference. And I don't claim to be an expert in like the parameters or how they do things in the back. I just claim to be a user that this worked for me, and I hope this worked for you as well. So if you specify JSON, it's going to return a JSON, and if you say this is iOS, yep.
Okay. So, I mean, okay. So the iOS, like I've done that. Like I needed some quick configuration. I didn't really want to dig through syntax to remember exactly how to do a certain command. I'll just say, generate this Cisco iOS CLI to accomplish these things. And I'll give it the parameters and bang, it spits it out. And pretty much it just works. It's not always perfect, but pretty much it just works. So then you start getting into JSON and the training on that though, there's a million examples out there on the internet of code that accomplishes these things. So you can kind of imagine, okay, that's how it learned that. That's how the model picked it. But then you start getting into JSON and YAML and models that are out there, data models, I mean, not LLMs, but how would it know to parse that? I guess there's enough training data to figure it out is the answer. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I would tell you, because I'm in a mastermind group and one of the members was a Django core developer or a Django steering committee, or I forgot what Jeff's title was. But essentially, I think something that he mentioned that's quite interesting to me is that because he's well-versed in multiple languages, multiple frameworks. And what he said was all the LLM models get better answers on Django over other frameworks, mostly because Django has been open sourced and Django has been very meticulous about documentation and about having open conversation with contributors. They open a GitHub issue. They'll talk back and forth. They'll say, hey, this is a Zen of Python. This is why we should do things and so on. So when the model trained, they look at all these public available data. So it's almost like you give it, when they were training, you have more information to begin with. So now when you ask something to that particular model who has all this information, is that they will give a better answer just because of the historical data that they have, the accumulation of these historical data and versus some other framework. So I would imagine that's the same thing. If all of your information is behind a paywall or all of your information, the histories were all private and they have no access toward it, chances are it's not going to know. It's not going to be as good of a companion as something that's Python, for example.
So I was assuming every time you came to the prompt window, you're sort of starting fresh. But it sounds like you're saying you can build up a collection of prompts like you have a collection of scripts, so that you aren't having to every time go back and provide context, put in the guardrails, add a persona, figure out what kind of output you want. Is that what we're talking about here? Like,
yeah, precisely.
People have a repository of prompts.
Yeah, and I think that's what some of the college kids have. The early days of chat engineering, when you have to save everything in like the same single box, so they have a prompt when they're doing homeworks, for example, right? Hopefully this is a prompt they have. Under no circumstance you give me the answer right away. You want to make me think and just give me all the data, right? Like that's a prompt.
That's the parental prompt, but
yeah, the parental prompt, like the mom prompt.
Yeah.
And then there's like the prompt of, hey, it's Friday night, I just want a quick answer, have some beer with my friends. So anyways, so they would have all these prompts that saved up and depending on search engine paste in. So definitely that's one way to do it. But as what we talked about, right, there's also like these hidden files that you could, according to their documentation, this is what they'll look at and save you some typing, save your team from going off of the rails. For example, if back to our JavaScript example, if a fourth person shows up that I don't know, Scott Robon, right? He joined our team, and he wants to dig in on the code, and they say, hey, give me some JavaScript. It's not going to give you React or Vue because we already set up that guardrail as plain vanilla JavaScript versus some kind of framework.
We've talked a lot about models that have been trained on publicly available data, the entirety of the internet and documentation and so on, so much of what's out there. But let's say I'm on a network operations team. We got our own internal standards and the model wouldn't know about any of these things. Naming conventions, description fields, just the way we do certain things. And I want the LLM to give me answers with that information as part of its context. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, that's back to the agents.md file, cloud.md file. You could put all of your, naming convention standards in there if you want it to be semi-permanent, and then you check into Git. And so that, somebody else would, synchronize your Git, get that repository down, and you automatically have that boilerplate. Or, you just kind of specify in your individual chat window and say, every time you start your chat, you want to have all these always use airport code dash, function of the device, and then, routers or switches, and then your tiers and so on and so forth. So I think there are multiple ways to do that. But, once you have something that's set as a team, just like, when you have welcome a new team member, right? Like, we all use VS Code. So, let's go get you download VS Code, get you that onboarding process, right? So you're onboarding via these templates, and these templates you want to save it in a centralized location, and that will be like a private GitHub or whatever.
Well, you said a .md file, so a markdown file. So that is that markdown file, markdown delimited, but essentially it's plain English where I'm saying, hey LLM, my naming convention looks like thus and so. And or is it some structured data that's got to be in a very particular format?
No, it's most of the time plain English, and you could, you could see a bunch of examples, and they'll provide examples on that. On, I think it's just .md because it's, I don't know, it could be .txt, or you could do a plan mode, and so that's another thing that's kind of new by the time the book was published, but now it's like commonplace where when you launch a code assistant or I use Code Assistant the most, so I'll use that as an example, but I'm sure it's in other chat interface as well, that you can have ask mode or plan mode. And you actually, ask before you edit, or, I'm feeling lucky, edit automatically mode. So there's like 4 modes. So every time I start a project, I don't go to the edit mode nowadays. I go to the plan mode. And so once you start, using the plan, they would actually have back and forth. I will always end up with, do you have any additional questions? And once we settle on that, I say, hey, summarize everything that we talked about and then save it into a file. And, depending on maybe that cursor.md file, like cloud.md file, save it into that file, and then I would git check into my centralized repository so that everybody else has it, and they have this history. And then later on, if they found some mistake during that process, they could make their edit, they could check back in, and then next time I launch, I'll pull it down, and then there's some history behind it on why they changed what they changed.
So let's say I've played around, found a model I feel comfortable with. I've been thoughtful in my prompting. I've now got some output back. How much can I trust this? How reliable is it? Because that's the $100 question, right?
That's right. I would 10x that. I would like that $1,000, $1 million question. That how can I trust this? So I think that's a great question, and I think that really the answer comes really depending on you and how the risk factor, like how much can you Is this irreversible or reversible change? So that's always that human in the loop factor, where at this point, I don't think anybody or only the most risk gravitating persons would give AI the total control, right? Like that's the same reason I haven't used an open claw yet, because I just feel like I've given out too much control. So in this case, you get that answer back. I think most people will still be that person in the loop, because you could offload a lot of stuff, but you can't offload accountability, right? So you're still being accountable for it, and that's why we still don't have total autonomous driving. We still have like human monitor driving there. So you cannot offload that accountability. So
well, I could ask AI, how do I blame you for this? But
yeah, exactly. If you instead of git blame, I do it like AI blame, right? So true. Like if you find a good answer for that, just let everybody know. Right. But right now I think most of us still want to be that human in the loop. If we're responsible for it. And I would take a look at that config or whatever that operation they told me to. And then I would, ask myself, if I execute this, what is the risk factor? Can I reverse this? And then, that to determine my next step. If it's like irreversible, then probably different.
Okay, you've given us a way to think about it. That is, okay, you can't 100% trust what's coming out of the LLM. You need to be smart. You need to be wise and think before you go ahead and execute the code, for example.
Yeah, hopefully.
But in general, in your experience, going back to how Drew phrased that question, I've written a really good prompt with a lot of proper context. Do you think what you're getting back out of the LLMs, generally speaking, is good, saving you time and so on?
At least for coding assistant, I think it's getting much, much better, and to a point where I feel like I'm wasting time double checking AI because it's so much better than me. So I'll give you an example. I was trying Claude Code for the first time, like not the CLI or the plugin on your VS Code, but rather the Claude client that they now have. Let me get that particular. So they have co-work and code tab. So I was trying out that code tab for the first time. And what I wanted to do is I've always wanted to have a YouTube playlist with like 40 videos. I always want to transcribe them, summarize them, and then see how much I want to watch them out, right? So in this case, what I wanted was to download all the AutoCon 4 videos, and I give it a playlist, AutoCon 4 videos, summarize them, and then I will give a choice of whether I want to listen or watch this in entirety or just kind of skim through it, or the summary is good enough, right? That person, that speaker, Eric Chou, I want to just like cross right away, right? I don't need to listen to that for multiple reasons, but one of them is I was there. So anyways, I launched the code and I follow the instruction. I'm creating a space and then just give it something. And without me either like checking the code, because this is low risk, right? This is just simply doing, whatever it is that I would do, except it would take me hours, if not days, to come up with that script, and then it will be broken. Without me doing anything, it accomplished that task right away. And maybe not right the first try, but it would like iterate. You'll find out what the error was. Maybe it was missing a package. Maybe that package was incompatible or whatever it is. It just goes and then just like a cute cat, just accomplish whatever it is that it allowed to do. And I was very impressed. So I think that is at a point where most of the time I think it's I don't know, 99% there. If that 1% there, it's because I haven't explained it clearly enough for coding.
I guess that's been my experience too lately, where a year ago, certainly a year and a half ago, what you got back was kind of rough. It really but as time has gone on, as iterated, we've had new models come out. What I'm getting back is pretty reliable most of the time. And if it isn't, I can prompt better. I can, as you were just talking about earlier, iterate on the prompt and improve the output that I'm getting. And I'm finding that it's scary good. I'm with you. Like I almost feel like I'm wasting my time here checking its homework, but at the same time, I don't entirely trust it because we had a history with hallucinations there not all that long ago. So can I really trust it? But it feels increasingly like, yeah, we can.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the next big thing that we should, probably learn, do, or at least get familiar with the concept is AI evaluation. And that's actually what my AutoCon for talk was, is that, the title was clickbaitish on like which AI model is the best, right? But if you actually listen to it, it's actually, you want to evaluate the model. Like, that's the thing that we want to do, is we want to save those traces, what they called, on how they came out with the answer that they had come out that we never had time to look for, that we never had time to really dig deep into. We want to save in their location, and then we want to, at a later point, evaluate these models on how good they are. And I'll give you a example on, it's actually in the book, where we use the third model to evaluate the answers from like Turbo 3.5 and Turbo and the GPT-4, Turbo 3.5 and 4. And supposedly 4 will be better, but the third AI actually evaluated 3.5 to be better. And the devil's in the detail is that because I have a better prompt for 3.5. So I think going back to it is that, the next thing that we need to do is actually to figure out how to evaluate AI, have a good test bed, make sure, the blast radius is manageable, that we're comfortable with the amount of risk that we're taking, and so on and so forth, right? It's less about the quality of the AI, but rather about, what is the situational awareness that we're in to use this.
In terms of evaluating output, do you think there's value in taking a prompt and running it through 1 or 2 or 3 different models and comparing what they spit out to look at how they're different or not different?
Sometimes I just do it for fun, but most of the time I don't. Most of the time I find something that's good enough, that is, get me 80% there, and I'm happy with it because, sometimes just like going to a doctor, right? Sometimes you want second and third opinion for the really important stuff. And sometimes you're just good enough to go, oh, okay, I'll take that antibiotic and you'll solve my problem, and off I go. So sometimes I would deliberately do it for comparison, and just, even within the same provider, I'll compare between, GPT-5 versus, 4, for example, or, I'll compare between Sonnet versus Haiku within Anthropic. And sometimes I do it just for fun, but I don't think it's worth all the time to just compare all of them, unless you do it systematically and you want to systematically document. Like, again, if you want to eval, right? Like the same thing, everything else constant. This is the only change variable, the model, the provider, and what do I get? And kind of evaluate that. If you're doing it for that purpose, definitely. But if you just want to get like some code done, like YouTube, that YouTube example that I gave, that no, I'm perfectly fine. Just like it got me the results I wanted, and I'm good to go.
Okay.
Security, Eric. So if I'm working with a public LLM, which has been the vast majority of our context here, but that's what we've been talking about.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, man.
How do I think about security? So for example, I wouldn't upload router configs to the cloud unless I knew exactly how that router config data was being secured. Should I have that sort of thinking when I'm interacting with a public LLM?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's a great question. All the providers will want you to believe that they're absolutely secure, and there's no worry on the leakage and all that, right? But 5 Experian credit check later, I found out that they're just kidding about it. So I don't have a good answer about that, but I would say the one thing that I would tell others, and tell my wife, tell my kids, or whoever that come up and ask me, is that if you think it's important enough, you probably want to get the paid version versus the free version. And, we could talk about like you're the product or whatever, right? But, the thing is that I think most of the agreement within the pro version is you have the option to opt out of being trained for those data, like your responses being back. They absolutely need everything that you return in order to give you the best, description or the best response. But don't, paste in your social security, right? Don't, your banking information, that should stay private when you launch Gemini, versus like make sure you're not logged into your bank account or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a great question. At least in the pro version, that's why I pay for everything, is like I pay for everything and then I go into the settings to make sure that I opt out in everything I could opt out of. And what is the minimum thing I could give it in order to get the result I want? And sometimes the answer is not great. And like I don't want to pick out OpenClaw, right? But essentially, I feel like some tools are just overstepping their boundaries and wanted to so much scope and permission that I'm not feeling comfortable in giving it. So that's an open-ended question. But one thing that I would say is maybe look into the pro version versus the free version, and then opt out of everything that you could opt out of.
Well, Eric Chou, author of the AI Networking Cookbook, thank you for joining Heavy Networking today. And remind people where they can get the book and then how they join your community if they want to talk about the book.
Yeah, so anywhere that you normally get your books, a lot of times I see over 50% of the readers get their books from Amazon. So I'll say Amazon in in different formats. You can also order directly from Pact. I would love to have you sign up for networkautomationnerds.com. And there's when you launch the hero, actually have that joint, and then just type in an email address. You don't need to give your name. And then you'll receive a invitation link to the Discord that if you want to discussing real time. And when you join the community, you'll get email notification whenever I post something new. And that's how I aim to stay in touch on some of these stuff that we talked about that I didn't have the time or the space to include in the book.
Okay, Eric, thank you again for joining us. Thanks to you for listening to Packet Pushers today. Heavy Networking Podcast. Man, we've been doing this since 2010, and a lot of you have been listening since the beginning, which when you tell me that, it freaks me out. But thank you for doing so. Go get yourself a copy of Eric's book. Ask any of us that have our names on a tech book. They do not make much money for the author, but every little bit helps. So please support Eric's efforts and learn something new. I've been Ethan Banks, along with Drew Conry Murray. We appreciate you listening or watching each and every week. Heavy Networking is available as video now, if you didn't know, but it's available as video on Spotify and YouTube, and of course, audio, as it always has been, anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. And of course, subscribe to Network Automation Nerds with Eric Chou, and search for Packet Pushers in your podcast client to see our entire lineup of shows, 13 active shows, putting out a fresh episode each week or every fortnight. Thanks for what you do as a network engineer. Hey, you got a hard job. You aren't, we know you are not always appreciated for what you do. You catch way too much blame, and you make the absolute train wreck disaster apps that someone hands you work. Somehow you do that because you're that amazing. So again, thanks. Maybe no one else cares, but we do. Last but not least, just remember, too much networking would never be enough.